Okay, it looks like I'm live. Just checking to see who's out there. I see Eve is already out there with us. And so today, for those of you who are new, we're going to be working on the pillow of the month. The pillow of the month today is the March pillow. And we're going to be doing a quadruple Irish chain. And that's a mouthful. But I'm going to show you what that looks like. And so if you will go ahead and give it a thumbs up if you're new, or subscribe to the channel if you're new, because that way you can get those notifications anytime that I go live. It sends you an email. You can click on it and you can make sure that you catch up on it. All right, so let me show you what we've got going on. So the first thing that I want you to see is I want you to look at this block. That is what we're making, which is a giant pillow, and it's 26 inches by 26 inches. If you don't want a pillow on your couch that's quite that big, then you can cut it down, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But first, let me just show you what we're making. So you should have gone to my website and downloaded the handout. And so if you haven't downloaded the handout, let me show you what that looks like. So I will share my desktop so you can see that. And so this is the pillow of the month. It is the March pillow. And these are just the little icons that hold the spots. I have a printable handout that looks like this, and it gives you a list of all of the Jelly Roll strips that you need to make this one. And it actually shows you what it looks like when you make a single Irish chain, a double Irish chain, a triple Irish chain, and I've designed a quadruple Irish chain. So if you wanted to use this block to make an entire quilt, and if you have lots of greens, you could definitely do that. All right, say hello to each other in the chat. I see a lot of people are jumping in, but the supply list for this one is 4 of the dark green, 2 of the medium, 2 of the Kelly green, 2 of a light green, and 2 of a medium yellow or a white. And then I said 2 rectangles of backing fabric that are 16 by 27, and then Franken batting that is 27 inches square. So that is the supply list that we're doing for this one. And you should make a pillow that is 26 by 26. All right, so let me show you what else is going on. So this particular pillow gets joined with lots and lots of pieces. So we're going to be making 4 blocks that are made of 9 units each. And so you're going to need 12 of the unit A, you're going to need 16 of unit B, and you're going to need 8 of unit C. And let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to switch over here to the 2-camera view, and let me show you what I've got. So you guys can see me. You guys should be able to see what I've got in front of me. All right, so this is 1/4 of a pillow right here. And if you wanted to stop right here and have a pillow that was 12.5 by 12.5, or you wanted to add a border to this, you could actually just stop right there, and you don't have to make the giant pillow. But this is an important project because this is a skill builder. And matching all of these perfect little points is something that some people struggle with. And this is why I picked this as our project. And so let me just kind of give it a little press. This one should measure, if I have done everything correctly. And if you notice, I just kind of take my fingers and go along the seams. This one should measure 12.5 by 12.5, and this is what we're making. And this is without trimming. So let me see what I've got here. So this is a tiny bit bigger than 12.5, which is why I have this wobble. And then I should have, if I measure down the middle, I should have 12.5, and it looks pretty darn close. So this is what we're going to make today, and let me show you how to strip piece this block so that everything nests together in the back and all your points match like mine do. All right, so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to make 4 patches. And so for all of your blocks, your 4 patches are going to be made in the same way. And so you're going to start with this set right here, which is a set of diagonal blocks. And let me show you how I make these. So for all of the blocks in this series, I take 2 colors, right? And then I just put them together and I sew 1/4 inch. And this 1/4 inch is very important. And this is for a full length block. And so what I've done over at my sewing machine, I don't know if you can see it, is I've got a 1/4 inch marker strip. And any time that I'm sewing a long strip, this helps me because I take and I don't stare at the needle going up and down. I kind of align my block with this, and I just make sure that with my hand right along the edge that I am holding that, and then I'm holding it straight and steady. And so whenever I do I want an accurate 1/4 inch, I always measure from my needle to the edge, and then I put this guide tape here. And then I just take and I hold my piece right here, and I just make sure that my piece is staying straight along this edge. And by doing that and just stopping and making sure that those two edges are even on this side, I get a really accurate 1/4 inch. And so I just go like this. And it's easy for your pieces to kind of get off. So making sure that you know where that 1/4 inch is and staying super accurate is very important. Once you have this down pat, you can make so many things. Like I said, you're just going to pause and make sure that you're feeding that with both of those edges even. And you're going to feed that through. Now you're going to see me throwing these weird blocks in there. I've got a secondary project that I'm working on, which is a leader and ender project. So you're going to see me throwing some blocks in there as I go. Okay. So I have this. And what I'm doing with this leader and ender project is I'm just making bonus 4 patches out of all of the scraps from the last few projects I have. All right, so once I have all of my strips where I have sewn 1/4 inch on one side, then I'm ready to press all of my units. Let me bring it over here. So all of my units get pressed the same way. So this particular unit, I'm just going to press it like this. So I'm setting that seam. And then if you're going to add any kind of starch to these, this is the time to do it. And see this one, how my 2.5 inch strip might be off by a hair? I'm going to check it. So if you're going to starch these, go ahead and starch them now. Do not starch this after you've already sewn the blocks because it makes a mess. So now I'm going to take, and before I open this and press it open, I'm going to cut it apart. Anytime that I make a bunch of 4 patches, I do it in the same way. I have a small ruler that's a 2.5 inch ruler that I got at my local quilt shop. I love it, and it's going to get lined up. So I'm going to line up this line right here with the stitch line to make sure that it is accurate. And so I'm just going to line it up. And before I even pop it open, I'm going to cut these apart. And I'm lining it up with that stitch line so that these blocks are straight. And it's so important to do that. So I'm going to line all of these up, find a horizontal line that I can line up with my stitching on the bottom edge, and I'm going to prune these up. And I'm going to do this with all of my blocks. And I'm doing this to make sure that they're nice and straight. So these start as strips, and then I cut them into these units right here. Once you're done with these units, I'm going to check this one because see how this one has a little bit extra? I want to make sure that that is an accurate 2.5 inch, and it looks like this particular strip was off when I started. And that may not seem like a lot, but if you have that over and over again, you're going to end up not having points that match. And so always double check. Yeah, that particular yellow strip had a little bit of extra. And so sometimes when you're cutting your strips, you might not cut them perfectly 2.5 inches, so you just have to double check that. All right, so now that I have a little stack of these strips, I'm going to make sure that I pull this out like this, and that I've got these so where they're going in the same direction. So I just take my finger and I run it across, and that really flattens it. I've used the whiter side of this fabric rather than the greenish yellow because you pay for both sides of your fabric. And that's the color that I want to use. So this one is going all towards the yellow. So I'm going to make sure that I'm pushing that the right way. And the reason I want these all to go in the same direction is because when I match those up with the next color, I want to make sure that I nest my seams. And so I'm not pushing, pulling, and dragging. I'm just making sure that this seam, you take your fingernail and you run it across there, and that keeps the block from getting distorted. And then I'm going to give it a light press, just like that. And you're going to want to press all of these. And making accurate 4 patches is literally an essential thing if you're going to be working with a lot of jelly rolls. All right, so once I have all of my little pairs, I'm going to match them up with the pairs that they belong to. And so in this case, this little yellow one here goes with 2 squares, but instead of cutting 2 squares, I left one 4.5 inches because in my block, in this corner, I have this 4 patch, and so I just left it square. And so these 2 go with this, and so I just start building my block from here across. And then I'll show you how these get put together. So I start at the bottom, and you can refer to your diagram because that helps. And then I'm just going to lay these on top. I have other blocks that I've made that need a little friend, and so I've made some other ones. And this one goes like this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up all of my little squares that I need to make. So I need to make these units. I need to make these units. So this is unit A, unit B. If you notice, this is unit A, unit B, unit C, right? And so A, B, and C is what I'm making. So this is A. This is B, and this is C. So I'm just going to pop those together. And when I have pressed those, look at what happens to that seam. That seam nests, and so all you have to do is slide that together. And you push it with your fingers, and you don't even need to pin. Look at how accurate that matches on both ends. That means that 1/4 inch seam is really accurate on those 2 units. And on this one, I don't even have a 1/4 inch seam. I often will pin, but you don't have to. And if you want to, you can just pop a pin right there just to keep it from sliding around. All right, then you take these over to the machine and you do the same thing that you did to the other thing. So I'm just going to take and I'm going to run those through my machine just like that. I don't know if you need a light. Let me see. Now that makes it hard to see. And I line them up with this edge and I push them in there so that I get a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam. Now these are great for chain piecing, which means you don't break a thread, you just keep going. And so I'm just going to make sure that I pause right in the middle and get that lined up, because a little tiny bit of wobble in these can cause your seams to end up being off and then they don't match. And that's kind of super important for this project. Not all projects are like that, but this one definitely is. All right, let me grab this one and head over to the camera so you can see what I'm working on. All right, so now that I've got my 3 sets of blocks, I have A, I have B, and I have C, I want to press those so that my seams are going one way. And it doesn't matter which way. But for this one, I'm just going to finger press it because I may want to come back. And this is where the wool mat is important. I may want to come back and switch the direction of that seam based on how they lie down. So I'm just going to press it. This one I know will match, so I'm just going to push that down. And these are ready, right? All of these should now measure 4.5 inches, all of these units. And I'm going to start assembly line connecting all of these. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 A's like this. I'm going to add B's in here like this. I'm just going to find my B's. I'm going to put them in here. And then there is another B that goes in there. And this is what starts making that chain. So I add A's, B's, and C's. And this is a big 9 patch. You notice this is just a great big giant 9 patch. This is great for scrap. If you wanted to make a scrappy one, this would be great with scraps. All right, so now I have my A's, my B's, and I'm going to introduce my C's in there. My C's just go like this. And I need one more C. So I'm going to take this over to the machine and I'm going to make sure that I sew one more C. And then this, once I have it all together, I just put it together like a 9 patch. Let me stick that in there. Yep, that's going the right direction. Always check yourself. It's easy to get these the wrong way. You just tease them with your fingers, make sure they're in the correct place, and then go over and sew them really quick. Just give me a second. And then, once you have 9 of these units, then you're ready to put together the big block. Why do I not put it together in rows? Was a question that somebody asked me in a previous project. I did a triple Irish chain and I put it together in rows. But one of the things that I found, once you start putting together a quilt like this one that has a lot of little teeny tiny squares, is you need to break it down in chunks so that those chunks go together and you have smaller intersections to match. Okay? All right, so let me see what I have. So let me show you my 2 cameras. So now that I have it, right, I have this yellow, and I switched it around. At first, I laid my fabric together, so I'm just going to show you guys what I did. So first, I laid it together like this. So the first thing I did was grab some colors, right? I know that I needed 2 darker greens, a Kelly green, so I used that medium one. And then I used a lighter green and a pale yellow, but I didn't like how that looked. So then I ended up with a bright yellow. And so I ended up with this one, and I think it looks good. It makes it pop. All right. So now that you have this, now you break it down into just a regular 9 patch, just like this. And you make every quadrant in this piece exactly the same. And like I said, I don't recommend cutting a bunch of little 2.5-inch squares and then sewing them in horizontal rows, because what you're going to end up with is a lot of grief to try to match all of those up. And so I'm just going to move these out of the way. And then I match these. And so I just need to make sure that this goes here. And then I'm going to test those seams, and they are going different directions. So I'm just going to set them aside. And I know that this is the side that I need to sew. And a lot of times I don't pin because I need to pin. I pin because it helps remind me which way I'm going. And so I'm going to sew these in horizontal rows like this. And this is going opposite, so that's nesting. And if you always kind of press to the darker fabric and you do it consistently, then all of these pieces will match. And then the next one is going like this. And you see how this one is off? We're going to have to make sure that it didn't cause any problems. And so now this needs to go the opposite way, or this one can go the opposite way. But I want to make sure that this will nest. So I'm going to lay this the opposite way, run my finger across there. And just by running my fingernail, I get it the direction I need to get it. And then I'm going to have to open that back up to make sure that I'm not doing that incorrectly, because it would be really sad if I stitched it the wrong way. And so it looks like this needs to go like this. I'm going to lay that on top. And always just kind of double check. This one is off, so I'm going to assume that this one is correct, and I'm going to measure first. And it looks like this green one is correct, so this one is just off a hair. I'll show you how to fix that. So I'm going to go like this. And then I'm going to pin on this side, and I'm going to sew this side of the block. If you ever want to do a postage stamp quilt, my suggestion would be for you to make blocks this size, 12.5-inch blocks, and then join all those blocks together. And then I'm just going to go to the machine, and I'm going to take all of these, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down the side. And I'm going to leave these just the way they are. I'm going to go to the machine, and I just bring them over here, and I sew them in order. Stopping and pulling that pin. You never want to run your pins over, friends. I promise you that. I had a beautiful Janome machine almost 20 years ago that I ran over a pin and I broke it. And ever since then, I'm just always careful about not running over my pins. Some people will sew right over them. I do not do that. All right. And then I'm going to just keep going with this secondary project I have. The secondary project I'm working on is called a leader and an ender project. And that's just where every time that I stop, I'm going to sew a 4-patch, and then eventually I'll have one for another quilt. And so I'm making 2 quilts at one time. All right. So let me see what I've got. Okay. Oh, so some of you guys like the green polka dot. The reason I did the green polka dot is because I wanted some contrast, and I had shades of green that were too similar. All right, so now I'm going to pull this apart. And so this goes like this. And I'm going to press that way. And then I'm going to lay the next one down. And I'm going to make sure that I go the opposite way. So now this one, it gets a 4-patch, and I go this way. And then this one goes that direction. And so by doing this, I'm constantly nesting these seams, and I'm putting them together this way. So now I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to make sure that this one is nested and that these go where they're supposed to go. And now I'm going to go sew these together. And you can pin every intersection if you feel like you need to do that. I don't feel like I need to do that, but I might. It just depends on how the fabric is behaving. Some fabric is very stretchy and it requires a lot of pinning, but with batiks it's less so. And so it's not as urgent, but pinning at every intersection to make sure that those match is helpful. And if you ever have fabric that's got a little bit of slack, you can just push it where it needs to go, and the feed dogs will take care of the rest. And so this one is going this way. And then I'm going to pin it in place and make sure that it stays where it needs to stay. And then I'm going to go right over here and just put it right along that edge. And I'm going to let the feed dogs do the work for me. Anytime that you have a tiny bit of slack or extra fabric, put the slightly bigger piece on the bottom, and the feed dogs will take up the excess, and those pieces will match perfectly. So if you ever have that issue, especially when sewing a lot of 4-patches, that's how you fix that. Okay, so now if you see this is close, I stop right where that intersection is and I let it go. All right. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about whenever you're sewing 2.5-inch pieces is that you're working in increments of 2. So a finished jelly roll strip sewn with another jelly roll strip gives you a 4.5-inch unit. If you're sewing 3 jelly roll strips together, that gives you a 6.5-inch unit, and so on and so forth. So I always remember to count by 2s to check the size of my blocks. All right, so look at this. So now I have this. Anytime that you're working with these intersections, you want all of these to match. And see, now these are going this way. I'm going to make sure that I'm pressing that the opposite way. And this is how you get every one of these pieces to match. And so you're working in sections, right? You're not doing the whole thing at one time. So if you've ever wanted to make a quilt that had lots of tiny pieces, you're just working in segments. And here I'm just checking to make sure that it's the correct size and that I haven't messed that up. So I'm just taking and I'm pressing the way I need to go. And I went the wrong way, but that's okay. And then this one is now going to go the opposite direction. Just going to finger press that. And finger pressing along the way saves you a lot of headaches. And just make sure that seam goes where you want it. Run your finger across there like the pad of your finger, and then attach that. And so now I'm going to sew this one and match all of those segments. And sewing a postage stamp quilt seems very intimidating to some new quilters, but it's actually not bad if you do it this way. If you do it in chunks like 12-inch blocks or 16-inch blocks. You can even do it in 8-inch blocks, but the bigger the block, the better. So I like a 12-inch block, and then I just match all of these points. Now this, I'm going to sew as a unit like this. And then I'm going to pin this one, and I'm going to attach this as a strip on the side. And so this one goes here. This is ready to sew, and I'm going to take it over to the machine. And then I'll add the last one at the bottom. So let me go to the machine. And let me double check. Always push those down, those seams, before you continue so that they don't get crooked on you. And it removes any kind of wobble you have. And I do this one, and I'm doing this one. All right. When I'm done with this block or this pillow, I'm going to have a whole stack of 4 patches. As you can tell, that's what I'm doing. The secondary quilt is going to be all 4 patches. Okay, so now that I have these, I have only one more to add on here. Uh-oh, that's the wrong way. Yep, look, I rotated my block, and that happens. So what happens in that case? My beautiful handy dandy Jack the Ripper comes out. And when I was not on camera, I didn't have this issue because I took my sweet time and I went slow. But it never fails. If I'm on camera, I'm going to turn it the wrong way because I'm trying to do 3 things at once, right? All right. You guys ever want to seam rip? That's the easiest way. Is just do it that way and then come carefully through here. I don't like to stretch it, so I just kind of go through here. If you ever want to know how to seam rip, I just go about every 3 all the way across. And I think somebody tried to warn me, but I should have been paying attention to those questions. Does anybody have any questions in the chat? Has anyone made a postage stamp and they want to give newbies some pointers? Because this is literally how I built. I made a quilt that had 2,000 2.5-inch squares. It belongs to my husband. He won't let anybody else have that quilt. It's his. And it was all of the leftovers from a decade's worth of projects. I just kept putting 4 patches in a box. And eventually I had over 2,000 little pieces. And I made a postage stamp quilt, and it's my husband's absolute favorite. All right. We're gonna get there. And try not to pull when you're seam ripping. So just carefully go about every other one like this. Come in sideways with Jack the Ripper. Jack, my least favorite fella. Reason I don't like Jack is because every now and again I have ripped fabric, and that makes me really sad. Because I use a really tight stitch length. And so this is why I kind of go this way. All right. The more arthritis I get in my hands, the harder this is. Always pay attention, people, before you start sewing big seams. Melissa, yours had 4,000 1.5 inches. Mine were purple and then leftover pieces from doll clothes, children's clothing, curtains, dresses that I made for myself. And so literally all the way through my mid-30s and my early 40s, I collected 4 patches in a little box. Every time I would do a project, I would make 4 patches with the leftovers. And then eventually I made a postage stamp quilt. All right. So this is the direction that it should go. Fine time, right? And so you just press it. Always press after you do that. And if you have a bunch of leftovers, you can just get that out with a rubber band. I have this one that has a rubber bottom, and it pulls all the threads out. So if you don't have a seam ripper with a rubber bottom, you can just use a regular pencil eraser, and it gets all these little threads out. All right. Now I'm going to measure this because this is an important thing. See how it kind of got off wonky? It stretched out on me. I'm going to measure this and trim it. And so that should be 8.5, and it's 8.5 down that middle seam, but this one is off. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that so that it matches, because I don't like to have something that wobbles, and that one was extra. So now, let me see. This way is the correct way. This way is the correct way, and this way is the correct way. Goodness gracious, right? Let me attach this one, match this little guy, and sew it on here, and then come back. And so that's how you build the entire thing. Make sure you turn them the correct direction. Keep your seams accurate and keep them from wobbling. And then you won't have all of the issues. You won't have to seam rip like I did. And then every one of these little points will be perfect if you just follow that rule. And this is probably the hardest thing for new quilters to master, is those perfect points. But I don't want you to panic, because if you take your time and you do it slowly and you work on those intersections by pinning them together, you're going to really, really have some really nice, perfect points. All right, so I'm going to do this last seam that I had to redo because I pinned it the wrong direction. In some channels, they just edit out all their boo-boos. I don't. It's fine. You get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm okay with it. I've never met a quilter yet that hasn't had a date with Jack the Ripper. All right. I'm going to take all of this off. And then I'm going to pull this. If you have a vintage machine, a tip that you may want to know is this one here. If you take the take-up lever all the way to the top, you don't get any tangles on the bottom in your bobbin. And that's true of modern machines as well. Okay, so now that I have all of these seams going all these weird ways, this is a good time to take your fingers, and let me show you what I do. So I'm going to take my fingers, and I'm just going to flatten those seams so that they go the correct direction. And then I'm going to take, and I'm going to press from the top. So I have flattened them in one direction, and I'm going to feel all of these little intersections to make sure that those seams aren't twisted. And then I'm going to flatten those out. And if I've done my job, all of these little intersections will match. And then I'm just going to take and straighten it out. See how it looks a little bit crooked? I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to kind of tug at it just a hair and run the hot iron across there. Because sometimes when you're pushing and pulling through the machine, it distorts your block. And so what I'm doing is I'm blocking it and just making it straight. And I'm just going to take and make that super straight. And that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to join this last row, and then I'm going to sliver trim the outside of this. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to lay this on top. And this is where I'm going to turn the seams where they belong. So this one is going to go that way. And this one is going to go that way. And so I'm just pushing those seams to where they lay flat. And your fingernails are a great little tool for this process. And so they're just going to, you can feel them with your finger like that. When they lock in place, then you know you've got your block exactly where you want it. Now I know some brave souls that try to skip the pinning, but I don't know. I've been doing this for almost 40 years and I'm still a pinner. Are you guys a pinners or non-pinners? All right. And so I'm going to pin over here. And then I'm going to pin right these two intersections. You can pin every other one if you want to. And then these two intersections are right here. So now that I have all this pinned, I'm going to do my last seam, and this one is ready. What was the tiniest quilt pieces that you like to sew together like this? Melissa's a pinner, Robin's a pinner. I'm definitely a pinner. I don't know how to work without pinning. Because every time I skip pinning, I have problems. And anytime I get in a hurry, I have problems. So I definitely am a pinner. All right. I like working with vintage machines when I have a lot of seams, especially a 401 or a featherweight or a 301, because these machines have such beautiful fine stitches, and I rarely have problems with my seam allowance. I just end up with really accurate seam allowances with my vintage ladies. You have to really know how to work with them though. But they sew like a dream, even though most of these machines that I own are 70 years old, they still sew really, really nicely. All right. Okay. Yay! I finally did it. All right, so let me show you what I've got here. So now that I have this big block right here, now I'm going to flip this one seam over to the side, and I'm just going to take my finger, and this is why I like these wool mats, because you can really feel that seam and get it to lay flat without totally distorting your block. And so now I'm going to take and I'm going to carefully press that seam over to the side without distorting my block. And I'm going to start checking every one of my seams so I can see if I stitched it exactly the way I wanted to. And let me look. This all looks like every one of those points match, even with this thread that I have floating around over here. If you have thread left over from a seam rip, just like this, just pull it out carefully. It gets stuck in there. You ever have a little tiny piece of thread that gets stuck? Just pull it out with tweezers. And then you're fine. And so now that I have this block, I'm going to need 4 of these. And how these go together, these are all the same. And then you're going to rotate them. And so how these go together is just like this. And so in order to make my big one, my 26-inch pillow, I'm just going to join these together. And they should go like this. You should have a seam that looks like this. And then these come together. And this is called a quadruple. Irish chain because it goes 1, 2, 3. This is 3, and then this is 4. So this is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's why it's a quadruple. A triple Irish chain only has 3 rows. A double Irish chain only has 2 rows. So this is a quadruple Irish chain. And if you wanted to make a giant quilt, this is how you would do it. And you would just join your blocks all through the quilt just like this. All right, everybody. So this is what we're working on. If you want to make yours 26 inches, you would add these 4 together because 12 and 12 makes 24, and then you can add a little border on the outside. If you don't want to make pillows quite that big, you can just go like this and then add a nice generous border to that of like 3 inches around, and you could have these beautiful pillows. I chose these colors because March is the month in which daffodils start peaking, and daffodils are green and yellow. And so that's also why I put those in the block, but this is what you're making. Make 4 of these, put them together, and make yourself a pillow. I hope that you learned a few things about putting together little teeny tiny squares. Don't put them all individually together. You don't need to. Strip piece as many of these units as you can, and this little humble 4 patch is all you need in order to make this big, beautiful block. All right, everybody, I will see you guys at 6. This should be nice and easy. Then all you do is put 4 of these together and your pillow is complete. And I will see you guys at 6 in order to continue the Fruits of the Spirit quilt. And I just want to thank you guys for joining me. All right, everybody, I'll see you guys later. Bye. Make a big one now, right? Now all you have to do is make a big one. All right, friends, bye-bye.